those were 3 films that I had done.
Mr. Depp, during your cross-examination, Mr. Rottenborn showed you a number of text messages between you and Paul Bettany. Do you remember that?
I do.
Could you please explain to the jury what your relationship with Mr. Bettany is?
Mr. Bettany and I had, we'd met while I was making a film called The Tourist in Venice, and we were, it was an instant connection. He's born and bred in the UK and has that English sort of dry, kind of obtuse, abstract sense of humor. And that was one of the things that we connected on, is taking, even if it was a difficult or unpleasant situation, we would, do our best to deal with it with humor, as opposed to just a constant complaint or whining or anything of that nature. We dealt with it with humor, albeit sometimes as these are private texts that have been, there was a lot of in context. It's important to know that none of it was ever intended to be real, and the language that's used, which yes, I am ashamed that that has to be spread on the world like peanut butter. For example, the text that is about burning Ms. Heard it's directly from Monty Python in the sketch about burning witches and then drowning the witches. This is a film that we'd all watched when we were 10, and it's just irreverent and abstract humor. That's what we were referring to in those texts.
The text message that you just referenced, other than Mr. Bettany, who else saw that text message at the time that it was sent?
No one. Of course not.
Based on your own observations, how would you describe Mr. Bettany's relationship with Ms. Heard while you and Ms. Heard were together?
Abominable.
Why was that?
Ms. Heard despised Mr. Bettany mainly because we had become such close friends, and for her he was a threat, and would take me away from her with regard to if Paul Bettany was getting the attention from me. That was a showstopper. It would cause all kinds of unpleasantries, to the point of where when we were on the island with Mr. Bettany, his wife, and his 4 children, Ms. Heard and Mr. Bettany got into some debate over lunch, and I just remember that whenever Mr. Bettany tried to make a point, she would talk over him, and then it started to get quite rude. She got mean, and she got loud, and then I believe it was his 18-year-old boy who was getting ready to go to a very bright, brilliant kid. He entered the conversation because this was something to do with what he'd studied in school, and he knew quite a lot about it, and he voiced his opinion, and Ms. Heard demeaned that young man to the point of where he burst into tears and walked away. And it was at that point that I had spoken to Ms. Heard and said, that's just unacceptable. That behavior is unacceptable. You have no right to demean that boy. You cannot always be right. You should try being wrong sometime because you might learn something. And then I asked her to, I thought it was best that she leave the island.
Could we please pull up Defendant's Exhibit 245? And Mr. Depp, I believe this is another text message with Mr. Bettany that you were shown on your cross-examination. And directing your attention to the text message at the top of the page from May 30th, 2014. Do you recognize this text message you sent to Paul Bettany?
Yes, I do.
And could you please describe to the jury what you are conveying to Mr. Bettany in this message?
This again is, I suppose, an example of the way that I write and express myself. That is to say, you stretch your situation out to give him the understanding that you're drowning, essentially. So everything that I say here is, in fact, an impossibility for the human body. I would have been, well, I would have certainly at least had to be rushed to the hospital for a stomach pump. There's a line here that, if you don't mind, I say that when I say I'm done, I am admittedly too fucked in the head to spray my rage at the one I love, for little reason as well. I'm too old to be that guy, but pills are fine. The pills that were referenced were the pills that I that I was coming off of, and they were the only thing that could give me some semblance of the same numbing effect that I searched for as a child with my mother. And saying that I was too messed up in the head was, it's kind of like if you've been told since you were a child that everything you do is wrong, and that I shouldn't have even been alive, or whatever, joyous little treats that my then very sick, very ill mother brought to me. Ms. Heard was well aware of my past, my childhood, therefore was very adept at knowing exactly which buttons to push. So at this point, I felt like, well, I was that little boy again in my head, like, I guess I am incapable of doing anything right. I guess I will never be happy. I guess that this is who I am. I can't get along with this person. But it's confusion, you know. It's nothing that you can. It's nothing that anyone could sustain for any length of time. It's nothing that anyone should have to sustain for any length of time when you're being demeaned, berated, judged, and treated like a lesser animal, and treated as if I'm only surrounded by yes men, and that I'm a bad father, and that these things are endless. They were endless, and there was no call for them. It's hard to understand why someone that is supposed to love you could be that cruel. And there's also times where you just say, okay, I'm gonna try to not have I won't fall for the argument. I won't participate in the argument. Because I knew where it would go, into her circular pattern of psychological abuse.
Mr. Depp, what do you mean when you use the term blackout in this text message?
Blackout. Yes, because I'm talking about 1,000 Red Bulls and vodkas, 1,000 of them, 2 bottles of champagne, no food for days, half a bottle of whiskey, those things, had that been all absolutely true, would have not only caused a blackout, but it would have caused a severe alcohol poisoning, overdose. I would have had to have gone immediately. If that were true, I would have had to have been taken to a hospital, or I'd just die. So, no, blackout is when someone gets so drunk on alcohol, essentially, on alcohol. But the pills that I had my addiction, that I was addicted to, the roxycodone, which are very, very powerful opiates. Two of those would knock me out. That is to say, so there's blackout, which is a person could be wide awake and wreaking havoc, or having a giggle in a blackout and never remember it. But when you when you've taken the prescription medication, it knocks you out. You are certainly not, well, you're not in any condition to, first of all, swing at anyone. You are out. You go on what's called the nod, and then it takes you away into sleep. It's just very deep sleep. And I found that much more accepting than having to hear constant badgering and insults.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to show you Defendant's Exhibit 153, which I believe Mr. Rottenborn also showed you last week.
Yes.
Do you remember seeing this during Mr. Rottenborn's examination of you last week?
Yeah, yes, I do.
Okay. Now, I'd like to show you the full text exchange, which is in Plaintiff's Exhibit 120. And since there's been a number of text messages drawn from this document, this would be Plaintiff's Exhibit 120C.
Which page would that be, or underscore?
This would be 4 and 5, Your Honor.
4 and 5, thanks.